Hi, I'm Ryan North.
I'm Lori Fungi.
And I'm Sean Wilson. You're listening to Foster Family Matters, a production of CK Family Services. People united through God to enhance the physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being of at-risk children and families. And welcome back to the show. Thank you for joining us again. Foster Family Matters is the podcast, and hopefully you know that because you had to push a button to get to us. But we are so glad that you chose to listen to us today, and you should be picking up if you have not... What?
I just saw somebody join watching this thing live. My wife.
I saw that.
Everybody
She's been with us for a little bit now.
Everybody behave.
Pressure.
Gosh, I hope I say smart things now.
Well, you better give her some good nurture and love because
feel like I have
that's
to
what
restart.
we're talking about.
No, you're good. This is
Are we
good.
still good?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yes.
Roll with it.
Okay. So...
Hi, Kayla.
Hi, Kayla.
So I did that on purpose, Sean. I apologize.
That's okay. She's been there for like half an hour, hasn't she?
Yeah.
You were just waiting for the moment.
It's been a minute.
No, I literally just noticed it. Just popped up on my screen.
So, hi, Kayla. How are you? So nice of you to
She actually just started watching. You left her phone on the counter and went and did something else.
So, for those of you who are thoroughly confused right now, those of you who have not stopped listening, let me explain to you that when we're recording this episode, we're actually doing it live on Facebook as well. And you won't be able to find that at the point that you're hearing this via the podcast method because we will have obliterated it to get rid of all of the evidence. Except for that's baked into this podcast. But we do fun things like that. We think it's fun anyways. We're having a good time, and the folks that are listening seem to be enjoying it. So if you have not already, join our Facebook group because we let folks know in there that when we're going live, and you can be part of the experience and kind of see the behind the scenes. Nonetheless, today, our episode is a continuation of one that we started last time. We're talking about relationships and specifically strategies or tenets, pillars, hallmarks, a bunch of other fancy words.
Indicators.
What makes a healthy relationship?
That's a very heavy question, Lori. I'm not really prepared to answer that for you right now.
Don't worry, because I can, and as well
Wow.
as Ryan.
Fantastic.
I like it. Don't worry, folks.
An angel just got her wings.
answers.
Her wings?
Hers.
Sure. But in all seriousness, so today we're going to talk about there's four tenets, and Lori's going to help me out with this because I don't have my phone handy. But we've got give, nurture. We've got receive, nurture.
Sure. The person's ability to give nurturing care. The person's ability to receive nurturing care.
What are the other two?
The person's ability to negotiate their wants and needs. And then lastly, the person's ability to be interdependent.
Not independent.
Well,
interdependent.
Independence mixed with dependence gives you interdependence.
And you can't be interdependent unless you're independent.
Nor can you be independent.
Challenge accepted.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. And you can't be independent unless you're dependent. Which is why you asked earlier, do they build on each other? And to some degree they do. Like the first
Each of the tenets?
Because the first two we're going to talk about are like the same.
Foundational.
But you can't actually be independent, interdependent, and all of the dependent words we just talked about unless you've learned how to be dependent on somebody, right? Initially. So
I mean, I really think it depends.
Care.
No.
Never mind. But that's what we're learning in giving care and receiving care is interdependence in that dance, right? So that's why they sort of build on each other.
So the one we're going to hit on today, we're going to break this down into 4 episodes, and the one we're going to hit on today is
the ability to give nurturing care. Really basic. And I think why we're starting with that one is because it does feel so basic and it feels really, I think, familiar to us. If you're a part of this journey, and when I say this journey, I mean the foster adoption journey, most of us do really well being able to give nurturing care to others. And when I say the word nurturing care, I encourage you just brainstorm and almost as though you just opened up a thesaurus of finding different synonyms that go with the word nurturing. And I think they can all be interchangeable. So this is compassionate care. This is protective care. This is loving care. This is intentional care. There's really no other word there's not any words that can't go into that space, that nurturing space well. Mm-hmm. And so don't just, I want to broaden your understanding of what does it mean to be nurturing? Well, what does that mean to you? To some people, it means being protected. I know that I'm nurtured when I'm protected from harmful things. I know that I'm nurtured when somebody's really compassionate to me, right? And so I think that there's a level of subjectivity. How we identify and define that word is going to be typically how we act that out to others. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And like as you were saying that, you were broadening my perspective because I was actually going at this rather narrow. But that makes sense because one way in which I feel nurtured is when I'm allowed to be protective of others. Like when people kind of acquiesce, that's not the right word. When people give me the responsibility of protection over them, that's one way that I feel nurture. And that's kind of a different way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah, and I think, relationship requires at least two people. So when you think of these things like, the ability to give the care, think about not only, because a lot of people get immediately, well, is that child able to give care to other people? And we could just focus on the child, but am I able to give care to other people? Because sometimes that's really, really hard for people to do that, right? And you said compassionate care, and I wrote the word compassion down here because we can initially, particularly in foster care when kids are welcomed into our homes, we can initially appear to be super compassionate. And I just want to explain what I mean by appear to be super compassionate, because we do meet the child's needs. We feel sorry for the child, so we have sympathy when they arrive. And sympathy is okay because it's the starting point towards compassion, but it's not sufficient. If all you have is sympathy, you're never ever going to get there. What you need is empathy, because that's you seeing the world from the other person's perspective. That's seeing how things impact somebody else. That allows you to look outside of yourself, because empathy is a necessary component of compassion.
Sure.
The dictionary definition of compassion is a feeling of sorrow accompanied by a desire. Sympathy, empathy, right? A feeling of sorrow accompanied by a desire to alleviate another person's suffering. That's what compassion is. Your desire to alleviate somebody else's suffering, your desire to act in their best interest. Over and over, this idea is repeated in the Bible, and Jesus saw the crowd, and he had compassion on them, so he fed them. He had compassion on them, he taught them. He had compassion on them, he healed them. Right? His compassion drove him to action, to care for them in the way that they needed to be cared for.
He gave.
That's right. And so one of my favorites is in the Gospel of Luke. They talk about the story about the widow at Nain, and she's in her son's funeral procession, and so all the men in her family are dead. And so at that time of the world, that time in human history, that location, a woman without any male covering was basically out of luck, right? And so because Jesus had compassion on the woman, he raises her son back to life and restores him to her. And so I do like the way you call that compassionate parenting, because it is so much more than just feeling sorry for somebody, because we have to get there.
Sure.
It's a growth process to get to the place, right? You don't just wake up and have healthy relationships, because relationships require work.
Well, and I think even that characteristic of empathy that feels like such a higher echelon type feeling or expression, I don't think people empathize easily. I think it's something that has to be cultivated and nurtured and fostered within ourselves and practiced often in order to be able to step outside of our own selves into the shoes of somebody else. And I think there's I think we could postulate many different reasons behind that, whether it's now our culture and our society, and we see that this is selfishness tends to take over, it seems to me, now more in our society than it ever did. This self-centeredness and self-actualization and it's all about me, that there's some really great points to that. However, when you have self-centeredness, there isn't room for empathy and to be able to have the ability to step out into somebody else's shoes. And so I think that's important to to identify and kind of normalize that our hope is that empathy gets to be your goal, that you hope to be and you work towards being an empathetic person. But even with the relationships all around us of going into a new working relationship in a working environment, or a relationship with a youth group or a life group or neighborhoods, that you always kind of go in tentative and you go in guarded, we tend to, or we go in, oh, I'm going to give this compassionate type care, this welcoming type care initially, and to get the ball rolling of that relationship. And once that relationship is rolling, I think we tend to go back to our definition of nurturing care that was instilled in us. So my example of that is meeting my husband for the first time and feeling compassionate towards him of his story, and knowing that he had experienced a divorce in the past. I had an idea of what that looked like, but 10 years later, being fully involved in his children, now our children, and their two parents, so there's 4 parents collectively, all co-parenting, I have a different view of what that relationship looks like. I have a different view of what the divorce looked like. Is there compassion there? There is, but there's also now insight. I'm a person that when I give care, I love to cook for you, and I love to tend to you, and I want to make your bed every day so that you have a warm bed to get into, and I pull the sheets back in my kids, and they're teenagers, they're 20 and
There's a turn-down service
50.
at your house?
There is. If I had a mint,
one lamp, some Mozart, and a mint on the pillow.
I'd like to point out that she says that she likes to do all these things. She's not saying that she does them all.
Excellent.
Well, I was going to say, has she ever cooked for you? Because she has never brought me food before.
Well, no, but in all fairness, I do not live in her home, so.
Well, she said, when I like to care for people, I like to cook for them, is what she said.
But this is, I love the idea of my...
Moving on, she says.
Thank you, and we're going to keep going.
I don't even know if that made sense, but it felt right.
That when my kids, when it's time for bed, even as teenagers, they're going to see that little corner pulled down, and they're going to, my hope is that this is just a small gesture, just an expression of care and love for them, right? So, but there's a reason why these things are important to me, because this is the way that I was loved on as a child. So being really, we're talking about a great deal of self-awareness of being able to say, I care for others in a certain way because somebody cared for me in that way. And there's some familiarity to that. So
let me ask you a question real quick. Because a thought just jumped into my head with regards to that. Because I'm always I'm the guy who, I bristle sometimes when I hear people say, I'm going to go help these people over here. Okay, and I'm using that in the context here of giving nurturing care.
Sure.
Because I think that sometimes we assume, and it may be that we have actual empathy and that we're there and that we actually understand what a person's needs are and we're able to just go and help somebody. But I find that frequently people who have tried to help me in the past have trampled all over me trying to help me. Because they're trying to really meet their need to help me and not meet the need that I have. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to discuss maybe here in the context of that. We have to be introspective enough and understand, yes, this is how we like to help. And so do we just seek out people who need that sort of help that we like to provide? Or if we're already in a relationship, maybe, what do we have to do? What toggles do we have to flip internally to be empathetic to the other person who we've expressed care for, to shift gears to meet their actual needs versus the needs that we assumed that they had that might not actually be what they need?
So there's a thought I had while you're asking that question. Context matters.
Yes.
Right. So in the context of a relationship, giving care to somebody is different than going halfway around the world to help people.
Right.
Because that's not relational at its core. That is scratching something inside of me.
Sure.
Now, some kind of relationship may come out of that. I get that. But what's driving it is something in you. The ability to give care is because I care about you. Right, so this is how we. So I just want to say one thing before I finish that answer. You're talking about turning the sheets down for your kids at night. Mm-hmm. When you stay in hotels that offer turn down service, and unfortunately we don't stay in those enough, but when we do have occasion to stay in this, I always request it. Because it is special, like when you come back from dinner or whatever, and your bed's like ready for somebody to climb into it, and there's a little mint on them, all the kind of, you do really feel special when somebody cared that much about making you feel special, right? And so this is one of the ways that we kind of coach giving care at our home, because you have to coach it into the kids, right? Because if you don't believe that human beings are narcissists, only care about themselves, you've never met a baby before. Right, when that baby is just operating mostly on their downstairs brain, well, not mostly, entirely on their downstairs brain.
Completely.
Right, the baby doesn't care that they're crying woke you up at 3 a.m. The baby only cares that they're hungry. Okay, and so we have to coach that out of our kids and help develop that, because empathy is a higher function of the brain. And if it doesn't get, typically, the neurotypical wiring doesn't happen, that stuff's not going to start immediately be there. And so one of the ways we coach giving care is at our home. Somebody, if you're hurt, somebody has to give you a Band-Aid. Right? Somebody has to care for another somebody in our home. You cannot put your Band-Aid on yourself, because that's one of the things that kids who struggle in a relationship only want to take care of themselves. Right? I mean, the next thing we're going to talk about is the ability to receive the care. Right? That's where they kind of go hand in hand. And so you have to coach people on having somebody else care for them. And you have to coach people on caring for somebody else. And so even my wife and I, we don't put Band-Aids on ourselves, and people laugh at us. And if you have other adults at the house, they think we're awfully silly. That if you cut your finger trying to slice onions to cook dinner, that you go and find somebody to do it for you instead of just doing it for yourself. But it does coach you to give care to somebody else. And so as we see these things over time develop, like if one of our kids gets hurt, typically one of the other children will run to the freezer and get an ice pack. And then we're like, oh my gosh, they actually cared about somebody else and gave them some nurturing care. That's beautiful. We're noticing that healthy relationships are growing in our home, because when the kids bicker and fight about toys, or they yell at each other, or you touched me, and all the stuff that kids fight about, right? When that happens, it's less important to us, because I know when somebody's hurt, that person who was yelling about you touched me 5 minutes ago will actually go and get them something and care for them to meet their need. And so that's an indicator of a healthy relationship, because it's important. But what so often happens in families, and happened in ours for a long time, is we focus on that which is not important. The bickering. That's my toy and that stuff. And don't focus on the fact like, oh my gosh, that 5-year-old went and got an ice pack for their sister because they ran around the corner and slipped and stumbled into the wall.
Sure.
And going to what Sean was saying and coupling it with what you were saying, Ryan, is that I think between those two, like it sounds as though you and Kayla are teaching your kids, identify a need and serve that need, give care to that need. That's brilliant and so important, especially at this age and as young as your kiddos are, because those are the footprints to empathy when you can start there. And in the same breath, I think it's really important, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but it sounded as though this dichotomy of I'm serving you or I'm tending to you because I see the need. On the other side, I'm tending to you because I'm serving a need within myself.
Right.
And I think that's a really fine balance, and one that we need to be so introspective of. Is it you just went to your friend's house whose husband's in the hospital and delivered 5 meals for her and for her family, and then went home and posted on Facebook of just sent 5 meals to so-and-so's house.
Crushing care.
Nailing it.
Hashtag.
And that's where it starts to feel uncomfortable.
Too blessed to be stressed. Hold on. I don't have a drop for any of this. I keep looking at my board, hoping I can.
At least it's not the crickets.
There's nothing.
At least it's not the crickets.
Mind blown.
Blown. I think it's really important that we be mindful of the reason and the intention and motivation behind our giving, nurturing care.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was kind of my point, is that I think that, and God bless anybody who helps. I have frequently told folks when we start getting critical of people, and we just tend to do that, right? They should have given their money over here, or
right.
they should have done this that way, or whatever. The reality is that God has blessed the folks who have resources with the resources they've got, and He's guiding them towards using them in the way that He wants you to use your resources. And so second guessing folks whenever they're caring for somebody is a bit silly, but. and frequently whomever is actually in need of help is appreciative of the help, regardless of what form it takes or whatever. So I didn't want to overthink it too much.
No, and it's not on us to be the judge. It's not on anybody to be the judge. We're saying this because we're our own judge.
Yeah.
And so when we do something, having the awareness to go, oh, you know what, that probably wasn't 100% unselfish on my part.
Yeah.
In many acts, we do things so that we do feel good
Sure.
within ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that by any means. It's just, I think it's really easy to say that we do this well, that we give care well. And I think that's the truth. Just as a society as a whole, we can be a really caring, compassionate society.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. In the same breath, it's are we doing it in the ways that the recipient, that we're meeting needs of the recipient? Yeah.
So I think a lot of, and I think maybe we've said this already, so I may be recapping some stuff, but I think it's easy though sometimes for us to assume that we're great caregivers, right? When maybe we're not as great as we think that we are. Yeah. And if we've got, I love the term that I think both of you guys have used. So I've definitely heard Ryan say it, folks that I'm doing life with who can speak back to me truth about the circumstance, even when it's something that I don't like to hear. But that's the thought that comes to mind in that set of circumstances, right? Like if you're the person who says, "Man, this episode's not for me. I can't wait until my husband hears this, or I can't wait until my wife hears this." Approach this information with even just a grain of possibility that there might be room for self-improvement as well, and your spouse might actually be more receptive to receiving it. But at any rate, the point that I was trying to make is that what strategies or what can we do other than maybe finding folks that we're doing life with that can speak back to us truth that we can hear? How can we kind of self-assess if we actually are good caregivers or not?
Yeah. So along with what you were saying, if you don't mind me jumping on
go
that.
ahead.
So along with what you were saying there, that is absolutely possible to help somebody that you're not in a relationship with.
Hands down.
Yeah,
yes.
but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about specifically in the context of relationship,
yes.
because I find that the closer you get to home, sometimes the harder these things are to do. It is easier to climb on a plane and go to Nairobi and care for people there for a week than it is to care for your own children some days. That's just simply the truth. And so I think one of the things you have to be careful of is if your kids have needs, and instead of caring for those needs, you find yourself getting frustrated. You find yourself being annoyed. You find yourself not wanting to help them. And that's a real check you have to have on yourself and ask yourself, how did you get here? Because in the context of a relationship, when people in relationship with you need you, then you will give them their care, right? Mm-hmm. If your friend says, hey, I need a ride to the airport, you typically will say, yeah, okay, I can figure that out. You don't tell them to Uber it. Maybe sometimes you do. I don't know. I feel like I don't tell people to Uber it if I'm in relationship with them. Like I help people who need help in the context of relationship, but then I find myself reluctant to help my children all the time. And so I have to question why that is. And the question then is that I obviously am not doing the work that's necessary to have the healthy relationship that I want with my children, because adults have to drive change in their homes. Right. If we expect the positive change to be driven by our children, that's a mistake. That's a shirking of our responsibility. And so as the parents, we have to drive the positive change, which means that we have to recognize that we can teach, kids can learn things or they can catch things, right? It's taught or it's caught. And I think that because I understand that it is caught, that I have to model what I want. And so, I can stop what I'm doing and I can help. Right. I can. I don't always choose to, but I can.
Yeah. And that's just it. The charge isn't to do this perfectly and that we're going to do this. That's not the expectation. The expectation is that...
That's not what we're...
You want to start the episode again?
aim for mediocrity, folks.
Mediocrity, it's not a bad thing.
It's improvement for some.
Because the big part of the bell curve's in the middle. Let's not forget that.
That's right.
That's true.
Apex.
50% of the population
there.
could benefit from mediocrity.
So it's all about...
I want that on the T-shirt.
Yeah.
It's all about exactly what Ryan just did in his humility and in his transparency to say, there are times that I don't do this
saying
well.
those things that
You're welcome.
people don't often use to describe me.
And it's on record. So the idea that we don't do this well all the time, but I can acknowledge when I don't do it well, and I can step back and make sense of it, and then I'm going to try again to do it better the next time. It reminds me, last night I walk in the door, 8 o'clock, just got done with work. It was a late night, and I didn't leave my work at work, and I didn't even leave it in my car. I brought it all the way through the front door into the kitchen, where I'm just kind of spent and I'm not in a great mood. And bless my husband's heart, all he's been doing is waiting for me to get home for the last 3 hours to say, hey, how was your day? And to reconnect from our day being apart. And I wasn't in a place to give any nurturing care. And that wasn't fair to him. And for me, did it get loud or chaotic? No. I mean, it was just quiet. I wasn't warm. I wasn't nurturing in my approach. I wasn't soft in my response to him. It was just kind of short and curt, and I needed my space, or I thought I needed my space. I didn't communicate that. So that's not nurturing care. It would have been nurturing care of me to say, babe, so happy to see you. I did not leave work in the car. I needed just some few minutes, please, if you can spare that. Right. But I didn't even communicate that. And so it's in the small moments and stepping back. And I realized as I was getting out of work clothes and getting comfy, I thought, he didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve any of that. And to stop and go back in and say, you know what, man, I'm sorry. I love you and I missed you. Tell me about your day. And then making time and attention to what his day looked like by putting mine aside. That's nurturing care.
Yeah, I love that.
Good example.
So we're kind of nearing the end of our time. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think maybe the next episode we're going to get into receiving care.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me say something real quick that'll tie into that maybe is don't get discouraged and give up caregiving. Don't give up caregiving if the person you're trying to caregive is not
a care receiver.
I need a map.
It's not a care receiver.
I need a picture book and a map.
There'll be
This is a long way to go.
Sean loves flowcharts. He'll make one.
So what I'm trying to say is if you're trying to help somebody who is not good at receiving help, if you're trying to care for somebody who is not good at receiving care, don't own that. Right? That's not you. There is responsibility, and we'll get into the next episode about being a good receiver of care. And so there are folks out there who are just not that great at receiving care, and sometimes that frustrates us and puts us in a bad spot internally. But anyways, final thoughts, and let's wrap this one up. Who wants to go? Anybody have final thoughts? Do we have final thoughts?
I'm excited.
I'm excited. My final thought is that if you think about these things, it makes perfect sense. Giving care, because if somebody matters to you, you should want to, right? The desire in you to want what's best for them should be cultivating. And so if over the course of these episodes, if these things aren't evident in your relationships, then I think you need to kind of pause and try to figure out why that is, get some help figuring out why that is, because we're made for relationships.
Don't be disillusioned by the simplicity. I mean,
that's good.
They're simple concepts, but it's worth the time and the energy to put in and unpack and navigate through those.
Fantastic. Okay, well, just a parting plea to like our episodes, provide us with positive reviews, subscribe so you get notifications. We put out this little show now on multiple avenues. You can listen to the Pure Podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. You
Come be a
name
part
it.
of our family.
We've done a really good job of dispersing the opportunity. If you're not listening to the show, you just don't like us. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It is not for lack of opportunity.
You don't have internet at your house.
That's right.
The year is 1893.
Yeah, and in which case, send me an email and we'll print a transcript for you. You can swing by the
year
office.
is 1893. The other night we were doing training, and so we still have a fax number, and I'm like, you have to get your documents to us, and just in case your documents still live in the 1980s, we have a fax machine.
Yeah, exactly. So
if you fax you a transcript.
Yeah. If you have not already, check out our Facebook group. It's a great place to communicate with other folks who are dealing with the same issues that you're dealing with. A great place to have conversation. We jump into it. The hosts, all three of us, jump in occasionally and dialogue with folks directly about what's going on. And what have I left out? Subscribe, review, like,
be a part of this.
thumbs up, tweet, share.
time.
Make a donation for a new hard drive. You've got that.
Make a donation for a new hard drive. We'll be. This is part 2 of our 5-part series on relationships. I look forward to talking to you next time.
Stay tuned.